All up, the Australian government, as at the last fiscal update, has committed some $267 billion to our COVID-19 response. That's 13.5% of the size of our economy, of GDP. On the direct economic support alone, it's 12.6%, some $251 billion, and this rates as one of the most significant COVID responses anywhere in the advanced world. In Australia, it has also been a united effort with the states and territories, who have also significantly added to this economic response with an additional $122 billion, or around 6% of GDP. But I think even they would say, it's fair to say, that the heavy fiscal lifting has been done by the Commonwealth over this past year. Australian government funding for the response has more than doubled the combined investment of all the states and territories put together and some. And even when considered as a share of revenue, the federal response eclipses those of each and every state and territory and those combined. So it has been federal taxpayers that have underwritten Australia's COVID response at every level of government in this country. Now, our government doesn't take any issue with that, none whatsoever. That was our job, that was our role, that was our responsibility to see Australia through, and so we have. Thankfully, we are now entering the post-emergency phase of the COVID-19 response. We can now switch over to medium and longer-term economic policy settings that support private sector, business-led growth in our economy. Because you simply cannot run the Australian economy on taxpayers' money forever. It's not sustainable. So since October last year, as the economy began gearing up, we have been gearing down JobKeeper and the JobSeeker COVID supplement. Both measures will now cease as planned at the end of this month, and that is consistent with the principles that I set out to you a year ago. For those who are in ongoing need of income support because of unemployment, this will now be delivered solely through the newly increased JobSeeker safety net payment. And this is the first time JobSeeker has been increased above indexation since 1987. Not a small thing. And we make this transition. And as we do so, it is also reassuring to know that the unprecedented support we have provided to the Australian economy during this past year will continue to support activity once these emergency measures come to an end. Our $251 billion in direct economic support, while largely delivered in 2020, it has a very long tail, as the chart shows. Treasury estimates direct support measures will see expected economic activity 5% higher in the current year and 4.5% higher in 21-22 compared with no support. We can see our economy's remarkable comeback in the latest national accounts. The Australian economy grew by 3.1% over the December quarter, led by the private sector, outperforming the G7 and the OECD average. Household consumption was strong, backed by confident Australian consumers whose incomes have been supported through the crisis, also increasing retail spending. But it also includes the ongoing support, such as the $50 billion in lower personal taxes for 11.6 million Australians announced in the October budget. The rise in private business investment was supported by government investment incentives worth over $30 billion. In particular, our supercharged instant asset write-off, instant expensing, has encouraged firms to start investing again, and I see it on shop floors all over the country where I visit. An example of this has been the strong rebound in vehicle purchases. So every time you see a tradie driving a new ute, it is further proof that the Australian economy is on the comeback. But it's not just small businesses that are benefiting. Visy Glass in Western Sydney, out of Emu Plains, a couple of weeks ago, that they were bringing forward $380 million of capital investment because of the government's accelerated depreciation policies and our commitment to recycling as one of the priority sectors under our $1.5 billion advanced manufacturing strategy. Now, this forms part of a $2 billion commitment by Visy to Australia over the next 10 years. That's a great vote of confidence and a real shot in the arm for the Australian economy. Residential building approvals and dwelling investment also grew strongly, supported by the government's home builder program, which has seen almost 90,000 applications and driven private housing approvals to record levels. Now, this has all meant more jobs. The unemployment rate has fallen down from 7.5% in July last year, that's the measured rate, to 6.4% in January. That's 814,000 jobs, I'd say, recreated since May of 2020. But even more striking, as I was noting at the time, was the fall in the effective rate of unemployment. That takes into account exits from the labour force and hours that had been reduced to zero. Now, the effective rate of unemployment peaked at around 15% in April of last year, and it is now also at 6.4%. By January, around 94% of the 1.3 million people who lost their job or were stood down on 0 hours in April were now back at work as of January. As a result, our labour force participation rate has already recovered to record highs. Job ads are now well above pre-pandemic levels, up more than 2.5 times from the bottom of the downturn. There are now more than 20,000 more job ads per month now than there were pre-pandemic. Business and consumer confidence has rebounded. The confidence is critical to further unlocking business and household balance sheets in the months ahead. And in the June national accounts, we saw the household savings rate increase to a record 22%. Australians were understandably taking shelter from the storm. By December, this had fallen to 12%, which is still above the peak reached during the GFC. So just as was the case at the beginning of this crisis, confidence remains the key. And this is how we can encourage Australians, by boosting that confidence to open their storehouses once again and drive the next phase of our economic comeback through increased consumption and investment. So what are the next steps? While there has been significant progress, we know that the job is far from done yet. The impact of COVID economics shocks will continue to persist for specific sectors beyond the end of JobKeeper at the end of this month. We understand this. That is certainly true of the international aviation, tourism and travel sectors that will remain severely impacted as long as international borders remain effectively closed, and certainly if arbitrary state border closures continue. So while it is necessary to draw JobKeeper and JobSeeker COVID supplement to a close, we do understand that ongoing targeted measures will be necessary to maintain our aviation and travel sectors while assisting those regions that are heavily reliant on international tourists by boosting domestic tourism demand in those areas. We will be saying more about that in coming days. We also recognise that while the labour market is strengthening, there are still Australians out there who are looking for work and who need to upskill. We have never forgotten those Australians, never once. At the outset of the pandemic, Minister Cash and I, we made keeping apprentices in their jobs one of our first priorities. In addition to JobKeeper, used by so many companies to keep their apprentices in work, our Supporting Apprentices and Trainees program has successfully kept over 122,000 apprentices on the tools.